tobacco control advocate in Uganda. I am involved in tobacco industry monitoring. The essence of tobacco industry monitoring is for purposes of compliance. We are involved in tobacco control because tobacco control means we put in place programs, we put in place sensitization strategies so that we improve compliance. We are afraid that unless the tobacco industry is not monitored for purposes of compliance, they will never comply. And of course also, tobacco industry cannot self-regulate. And of course also for most of the data that they generate, the researches that they do, they are supposed to be subject to peer review, especially by the tobacco control advocates as well. Now, the Tobacco Control Act 2015 has mechanisms of protecting tobacco control advocates, of protecting government, of protecting public health policies, and also law enforcers for purposes of compliance. Now, Section 19 imposes a duty on government to protect tobacco control policies from commercial interests or influences of the tobacco industry. It also goes ahead and talks about transparency, and transparency is a good tool for good governance. That means because tobacco industry is aware the products that they bring into the market are poisonous, or they are toxic, or they affect human life. That's why they say that tobacco affects the lungs, it affects the heart, and it also ultimately can cause death. It doesn't talk about how much excess you take or how much limit you have, because there is no safer level of tobacco exposure. The other aspect is that the Tobacco Control Act, specifically in Section 21, it prohibits the entering into partnerships and endorsement of the tobacco industry, especially by government. Government entities, if they give legitimacy to any activities, that of course has a negative impact on the protection of the citizens. So, to reduce on the surge of non-communicable diseases, especially those diseases that are occasioned by tobacco exposure, it is incumbent on government entities, especially the civil servants, not to endorse, because endorsement means they are legitimizing, and that means it's a challenge for protecting the non-suspecting members of the public who consume these products. The other aspect is that if a memorandum of understanding is entered into by government, local government of course inclusive, or civil servants, or even any other persons who are involved in administration, in enforcement, and implementation of the Tobacco Control Act, if they ever entered into a memorandum of understanding, then they are compromising on their ability to supervise the tobacco industry. And that, of course, even the Tobacco Control Act doesn't accept. The Tobacco Control Act also has another safeguard of ensuring that there is compliance in as far as incentives are concerned, that government should not give any incentive to the tobacco industry, say a tax holiday or free land, or even going ahead to accredit most of their products, because that will definitely take away the gist of protecting the citizens. So, meaning that money or those incentives are supposed to be rechanneled and put into public health purposes, because that will definitely protect the citizens. The other aspect is if the tobacco industry gave any contributions, that of course also takes away the ability to independently, of course, monitor the tobacco industry. I mean the law enforcers. So if they received any gift, that would mean their hands are tied. They cannot go on decisively to monitor the tobacco industry activities. The other aspect I also must highlight is if any individuals who are involved in formulating policies, public health policies, that's what I mean, or enforcing these particular laws, if they ever got any credit, definitely the tobacco industry would want to take credit. So what does the law say? The law gives deserving penalties, which penalties, of course, one of them is cancellation of those memorandum of understanding or partnerships, because that will of course ensure that the citizens are indeed protected. What is tobacco industry. Tobacco industry, of course, in the interpretation section of the Tobacco Control Act, among others, includes manufacturers, suppliers, or front groups, or even interest groups that are fronting the interests of the tobacco industry. What then does tobacco control mean? Those are a host of arrays of mechanisms or programs that are geared towards mitigating the effects that are occasioned by tobacco exposure. So it is incumbent on all tobacco control advocates in Africa, in Uganda, or by extension in the world, to look to it that citizens are protected, especially from the commercial interests or any other would-be interests of the tobacco industry. And then that is the basic principle of drawing that line, because tobacco industry and tobacco control advocates, whenever they are going to interact, those interactions must be transparent. The absence of transparency, or if they are not open to the public, will definitely grossly affect the public.
Talk about has Uganda registered success towards tobacco control?
Uganda, of course, is trying to create mechanisms. And I think now we are counting 2 years after the enactment of the Tobacco Control Act. So the regulations, when they come on board, the National Tobacco Control Policy, the strategic plans, when all of them are accepted and adopted, then we shall be seeing that already we have a tool of monitoring the tobacco industry. However, there are small, disjointed efforts of trying to monitor the tobacco industry. I think you remember at some point when the law was being formulated, there were some members of parliament, some ministers who were named as having received some incentives. So for purposes of trying to come up with a law that is weak. So that monitoring is important. But also you remember at some point towards the full commencement of all the entire sections of the law, the branding on cars stopped. But then again now, of course, they are coming in different mechanisms, but at least now the tobacco control advocates need to concentrate their efforts, especially on monitoring the tobacco industry, taking stock and developing or generating data or evidence that indeed there is no compliance, or the compliance in existence is skewed, and then again, of course, for purposes of protecting the public.
We had some tobacco industries filing a case to court challenging some sections in the law.
Yes. Of course, also that is also another mechanism of trying to weaken, perhaps also using legitimate means. But then again, the court pronouncement is yet to come out, and when it comes out, then we shall. But of course, on the 17th of May 2017, the Constitutional Court rejected the application for an injunction to stop implementation, stop constituting the Tobacco Control Committee, or by extension, trying to implement or put in place infrastructure for enabling the working of the Tobacco Control Act. We are optimistic that public health shall prevail, and we so pray.
What is your journey towards as tobacco control advocates? What is your journey so far about engaging universities, residents, and other people in public places concerning tobacco control and tobacco's public smoking?
I want to make a clarion call on all those well-meaning citizens, members of the community the world over, to try to interest themselves in supporting tobacco control advocates, or even reading all sorts of literature about tobacco control. So if we had every citizen, every member of the public who is against being involuntarily exposed to tobacco, then it is upon them to put their boots on the ground and then traverse the whole country, sensitizing, the communities or even the younger generation, but also supporting the fact that persons who are below 21 years should be protected from exposure. And this is a basic principle in environmental conservation of intergenerational equity, that the younger generation should not be affected by incidences or factors that are created by us who are now living. So let us educate whoever we think is ignorant about tobacco control, especially on the toxins, on the parts of the body that are damaged, and then public health shall provide. We will all be winners. And then again, it is also important that we, perhaps those guys who are neighboring the borders, where perhaps there's a lot of smuggling coming in, especially the seashore ports that are coming in, it is important that citizens, the members of the community are involved, and that will stop the increase of importation of these particular banned products. Cuba should not be on the market. It is important for the people who are in the retail shops not to sell them.
Currently, we still have a challenge, especially in rural areas.
Yes.
Rural areas, also hard to reach areas. There's an issue of those rural people, smoking in public, especially the local smoke. They use this tobacco leaves towards smoking,
yes,
and also in public places. And you've mostly focused on urban areas. How are you preparing to also reach these people and sensitize them about Tobacco Control Act 2015?
We want to reach out to various mechanisms. For instance, the parents teachers associations, that if the parents and the teachers can agree that tobacco exposure or use is harmful, then they will at whichever avenues communicate to the members, especially when there are school meetings. Then the other aspect is the religious leaders. We are calling upon religious leaders who live with these communities every Sunday or every Friday or any time when they are preaching. At least let them slot in the tobacco control messages. We are calling upon the archbishops to write pastoral letters so that that message of tobacco control can reach the last end person. And then again, we want also to reach out to the health workers who interact with these people every other time. Health promotion is important. Prevention is indeed better than cure. Prevention advantages have been tested. So it is important that we reach out to all these people, especially even our relatives. If we don't help them quit, or we don't help them stop getting exposed, then we shall be the ones who are actually contributing to them when they ultimately succumb to the diseases that are caused by tobacco exposure. So that is the message we are trying to, but also we want to tap into the already existing structures, community policing, marketing, the markets, the circles, and all those kind of things.
How are you connected with the police towards ensuring that you enforce the law, Tobacco Control Act? Because the challenge in Uganda, most of the laws are passed, but the problem is implementation. Yes. So how are you connected with the law enforcers?
The law enforcers, we are reaching out to them through capacity building. We have, ever since this law came into existence, we have never stopped orienting them in tobacco control. We have developed partnerships, and recently we had an understanding between the narcotics department of police together with the KCCA health inspectors. So these guys, when we took them around, they created a sense of working together, that togetherness. So we also know that if the law enforcers, through their joint mechanisms of trying to work together, but of course also that public health, environmental police, and now local government, because KCCA is going to start enforcement supposedly by December. They are going to start enforcement. They are going to clamp down on all those guys who are not complying. So we have built their capacity. We have created working relationships together, and we think every other time. But then of course also police has a toll-free number. where whoever is aggrieved can call on them. But I think the bedrock of tobacco control lies with the members of the public, the members of the community, by being vigilant, by trying to also use behavior change when they speak to all these people who are smoking, especially that this law empowers them to benefit from communities that are devoid of tobacco smoke. So if any member of the public is aware that they are being hurt by a tobacco product and they actually exercise their right to a free and healthy environment, a clean and healthy environment, which is a constitutional right, by the way. So we also think citizens now can use this law, this public health tool, to sue, especially those entities, those arms of government that are supposed to protect the law and they have not.
Any key message to Ugandans, especially those who are not conversant with the law? Any message to them?
I want to invite every Ugandan who loves their country, who loves Uganda continuing to be the pearl of Africa, to make sure that they are living in a non-tobacco smoke-free environment. That parents who smoke should love their children and not expose them to tobacco smoke. And they should never drive their children in the same cars where there is tobacco smoke. But then also, employers who are employing others and they're leaving them to get exposed to tobacco exposure, they are not being patriotic, in other words. They don't love their citizens like they should. But all of us, Uganda is too large to accommodate all of us. So it is important for us, and I want to request all the law enforcement officers, please, if it is public health, please play your role. And then again, that tobacco growing indeed fails increasing household income. So if all of us want to prosper together, if we are thinking prosperity for all actually means a lot for us, then it is important for us to reduce or to mitigate on the incidences of tobacco exposure. If we did that, believe you me, we shall somersault to middle income. Thank you for listening. God bless you. For God and my country. I remain Talibita Moses, a proud tobacco control advocate and working as a legal officer with Uganda National Health Consumers Organization. We speak, or we magnify the voice of the patient.